G'day, ZiggyD here, and today I want to share with you guys my thoughts on the best in slot legendaries for the Demon Hunter. Now, there's a couple of words of note before I jump into what I think is actually the best in slot items. Firstly, this is based on the current meta game for Demon Hunter. That is, Demon Hunter specs that thrive off Cluster Arrow and other similar fire skills. So for example, myself, I use Twin Chakrams and Cluster Arrow Load for Bear, and a lot of other people use some variation of Cluster Arrow Loader for Bear builds, or Entangling Shot, Justices served with Cluster Arrow Loader for Bear. Fire Cluster Arrow specs, which are basically dominating the Demon Hunter meta at the moment as the most powerful builds for farming rifts really quickly. Additionally, I'm not going to be including things like the Marauders and the Natalya set items in these. If you like the Marauders set bonus, the 4 set bonus especially is really insanely good. It gives you all of the pet effects at once, as well as having a bunch of pets on the field, and the Natalya's set bonus is really insanely good as well. If you need to sacrifice one of the best in slots I list in this video to get your set bonus for either the Natalyas or the Marauders, then that's fine. Those are best in slot sets for the Demon Hunter, but the items alone aren't best in slot, so I'm not going to be including those in this video to sort of avoid confusion. Basically, if you get like a full set of those, they're good. Use them to the best of your ability. Come up with some situation where you can get the set bonus. But otherwise, let's jump straight into it. So, coming in at number 1, we'll start at the top, at the head, as it is, with Pride's Fall, the legendary helmet. Now, I'll also be explaining where to get each of these items, so if you've been wondering that, and this is a common question, then rest assured I'll be sharing that information too. Now, I believe Pride's Fall is the best in slot for these style of builds for the Demon Hunter. Now, a lot of people like to throw Endariel's Visage out there, and Andy's is quite good. It's quite a good helmet. It'll give you more DPS, more sheet DPS than Pride's Fall, but as you guys probably know, people do tend to overvalue sheet DPS, and although attack speed does do a good job of inflating your sheet DPS, it doesn't actually synergize with the build all that well. And the legendary proc on Endariel's, although it is actually really, really good, in this style of build, you're usually keeping your range from enemies, like you're usually keeping range and not getting hit all that often, or not being that close to people. So the Endariel's proc actually doesn't hit all that often. But so that's why I reckon Endariel's isn't better than Pride's Fall. But why is Pride's Fall good? What makes this helmet so insanely good? 30% reduced resource cost reduction after not taking damage for 5 seconds. 30% is huge. Let's look at another item with resource cost reduction. We have my shoulders here, which can roll a maximum of 8%. This is 30% on one item here. Now, as a Demon Hunter, as a Cluster Arrow Demon Hunter, you are, as I said, keeping your range a lot of the time, and you very rarely get hit. In fact, I even synergize this helmet with the Awareness perk that gives me a 100% dodge chance after a few seconds, after it buffs itself up. If I do then get hit by a straight projectile or something like that, this will reset, but I'll keep the Pride's Fall effect. So when I'm actually farming on my Demon Hunter, most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, I have the Pride's Fall effect. Now, what's good about resource cost reduction? Resource cost reduction is everything in these style of builds. It allows you to spam more cluster arrows, so let's take a look at this just briefly. I have 175 hatred, and without the Pride's Fall, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cluster arrows per basically full dump of hatred. Now, I'll go ahead and quit this and pump my hatred back up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cluster arrows. So, 9 cluster arrows for 1 hatred pool instead of 6. We get 3 extra, basically. Very powerful stuff. But that's not all it does. It also makes everything else cheaper. I use Vault with the Danetta set. It makes that ridiculously cheap. You'll see it uses almost no hatred. It also makes my chakrams ridiculously cheap, into the fact where these are actually a net positive gain once they start generating discipline for me in my build. And then on top of that, they also make preparation punishment more efficient as well. By reducing the cost of discipline to rock preparation punishment, you get more hatred per point for discipline, essentially. So instead of costing 25, it ends up costing about 15 or something in my spec at the moment. And that is a big thanks to Pride's Fall. So the resource cost reduction is very, very good. Now, if you want to get this item, I've said enough about it. It's just really good. I consider it to be best in slot for these style of builds. But if you want to get this item, you have to farm the Act 3 Heraldric caches from the bounties. So you need to do Act 3 bounties, open those caches, and this has a chance of dropping from that. It took me about 2 days of doing split bounty farming across all of the acts, but you may have more, or you may have better or worse luck than me. But Act 3 Heraldric caches are the only way to get this item, so that's what you're going to want to farm to get this. Next up, we have a pretty simple one, the legendary gloves, Mage Fist. Now, these are pretty basic gloves, but the only thing that's out of the unusual from them, so I've just got basic trifecta glove stats here with dexterity, the only thing that's unusual about them is that they also roll fire damage, and they can roll up to 20% fire damage. Now, fire damage is not something that can normally roll on the glove slot, so getting it in an out-of-place sort of scenario on your gloves here is very powerful. It allows you to get a lot more effective DPS from your cluster arrow loader for bear, from your chakrams, from, you know, your entangling shot, and anything else that uses fire. So it's a big effective DPS increase. It's pretty much as simple as that. There's no other gloves that I think really come close to that level of effective DPS. So pretty simple stuff. Those guys are best in slot. Now these are a random world drop, so your best way to get these is going to be to gamble on gloves from Kadala, or to simply farm rifts on the highest difficulty you can, preferably in Torment. If you can't do Torment yet, then to do normal rifts, and basically you're getting the doubled legendary drop chance in rifts. Now you can't specifically farm for Mage Fist by doing rifts, but it will increase your chances of all legendaries drop, so you'll get them a bit faster. But otherwise, gambling on gloves from Kadala is the only other way to try and get these. Number 3 in the braces slot, we have the legendary Reaper's Wraps. Now, these are hands down best in slot. I think more so than any other slot, these are best in slot. Reaper's Wraps is nothing that really competes with them. Now, like every other pair of braces, these can roll fire damage, and Reaper's Wraps can roll up to 20% fire damage, so very nice. A lot of legendary braces can do that, though. That's not really what sets them apart. What does set them apart is the secondary effect. Health globes restore 28%, or up to 30%. This can roll up to 30% of your primary resource. Now, this essentially works in conjunction with Blood Vengeance very, very efficiently. Now, you guys have probably used Blood Vengeance before as a Demon Hunter. Whenever you pick up a health globe, you get some of your hatred back, 30 to be exact. However, Reaper's Wraps scales based on your maximum hatred, so using it with Blood Vengeance increases your maximum hatred, and if you're using your Paragon points to increase your hatred again, you get even more hatred. And this gives you 28% of your maximum hatred. So whenever you get a health globe, it'll restore your hatred like crazy. And that is in addition to the 30 from Blood Vengeance as well. So it's not unusual when you're rocking Reaper's Wraps and Blood Vengeance to pick up a health globe and have your hatred go from 0 empty to full. And that means more cluster arrowing goodness. Oh yeah. So the Reaper's Wraps are really, really, really powerful. They enable a bunch of different builds as well, not just this sort of build, but they really, really allow you to squeeze a lot more DPS, allow you to cluster arrow a lot more of the time, and really spam those skills much, much harder. The other good news about Reaper's Wraps is they're actually pretty easy to get. This is a craftable legendary. The legendary plan is a guaranteed drop from Malthael in the campaign if you were over level 61. If you killed Malthael before level 61, or you have for some reason didn't get the plans, then you'll need to reset the campaign and go kill Malthael again, and you will get the plans that way. The crafting material also drops from Malthael, but if you want a full guide to crafting these braces, it's pretty easy to do. I have a video which I'll link down in the description below, so make sure to check that out to get your Reaper's Wraps. This is probably one of the first things I would do if I was going to gear up a fresh Demon Hunter, is get my Reaper's Wraps. Very, very nice item. Now next up we have the legendary ring Stone of Jordan. Now pretty much everyone wants a Stone of Jordan because they are glorious. This is one of those more subtle sort of legendaries that people kind of might not rate it as much on your first glance, because, you know, if we compare the DPS of this ring to this ring, you know, the DPS increase of something with crit chance, crit damage, attack speed, dexterity to something like the Stone of Jordan, then it might not look very positive. It might not look very favorable, because Stone of Jordan, the two effects that it gives you don't do anything to your sheet DPS or your sheet, your sheet damage there. So it's a little bit more subtle, but what the Stone of Jordan brings to you is a huge increase in effective DPS, as well as a bit of extra utility as well. So what we get on the Stone of Jordan is 3 unique things. We get fire damage, up to 20%. You can see I've got the 20% roll on this ring. Now this can be as any elemental type, but for our best in slot guide here, we're looking at 20% increased fire damage. Again, we already know this is a very powerful increase in effective DPS. So, giving you 1/5 more DPS than what your sheet would otherwise suggest. On top of that, you get the hugely beneficial increased damage against elites. Now this can roll up to 30%, 25 to 30%, even 25% is incredibly good. This combines with your fire damage on top of your sheet DPS and it leverages all of your other DPS bonuses against elites. Now you spend most of your time killing some form of elite, so these counts as rares, elite packs, and I'm pretty sure even bosses are included in the elites category as well. And this gives you so much more DPS against these things. And these are the main things you want to kill and the things that'll slow you down the most. So this is a huge increase in effective DPS, well worth sacrificing a trifecta ring. The good news is though, these come with 2 other primary stats in addition to the fire and elite damage. So although I rolled dexterity and life on this one, which is pretty decent, you could potentially roll crit chance and crit damage on it if you really wanted to. So you might have to farm for a while to get this. Now this is another random world drop, so to get your Stone of Jordan, you're pretty much going to have to gamble on rings, or just get very lucky while farming in those Torment Rifts, etc, etc. But eventually, you're going to want one of these. I'm very happy that I was able to get one. Now, next up, we have an item that has been very elusive for me. You know, I'm making a best in slot video, and I'm showing you me having all these best in slot videos, but don't worry, I don't have everything yet. Next up is the Cindercoat. Cindercoat is another one of those ones that's really hands down best in slot for Demon Hunter. I'm using Cloak of the Guard Wolf, which gives 3 wolves and is a very nice chest, but doesn't really compare to Cindercoat. Even if I get a terribly rolled Cindercoat, I'm very eager to get one. Basically, Cindercoat does 2 things really nice for these style of builds for the current Demon Hunter meta. It increases your fire damage again, so again, another big increase to your effective DPS. But on top of that, it does an effect very similar to Pride's Fall. It gives you up to 30% resource cost reduction of fire skills. Now, you'll see that, you know, things like Cluster Arrow, Chakram, and even if you don't have a Danetta set and you use Trail of Cinders on Vault, it actually makes all of these things cheaper, up to 30%. And again, a huge resource cost reduction. Now, this can actually stack with Pride's Fall, and there's no downtime on it like there is with Pride's Fall. So, really, really nice. Going to allow me to spam, you know, more Cluster Arrows. Once I get it, I should go from like my 8 or 9 or whatever it is, Cluster Arrows now up to like 13 or something like that, and it's going to make everything more efficient and more damaging as well. So Cindercoat's very, very nice legendary, and on top of that, it has 3 extra primary stats. The resource cost reduction counts as a secondary stat, so you have space to get 3 other primary stats. That means you can get something like Dexterity, Vitality, and then 3 gem sockets. So a very nice chest all round, in addition to the fire damage in an off slot. You can't normally get it on the chest. And you can also get that resource cost reduction. Really, really nice chest, and something that I'm really trying hard to get. Now, how do you get the Cindercoat? Cindercoat, again, is another random world drop, so you just need to farm for it and get lucky. When you see those chest armors, pray, hold your hands together and pray that it's a Cindercoat. Otherwise, there's a very specific way to go about getting this from gambling. Gambling on a Demon Hunter is not a good idea. If you gamble on a Demon Hunter, most of the time, I'd say over 50% of the time, you're going to be getting cloaks. Now, cloaks have a 0% chance of being a Cindercoat. Cindercoat is chest armor and not a cloak. So, the way to maximize your chances of getting a Cindercoat that will still be usable for you is to take a level 70 monk, so level up a monk to 70, and then use it to gamble. So take your blood shards earned on your Demon Hunter, gamble on the monk, and there's a much lower chance of getting a cloak. So I think you can actually technically still get cloaks, but it happens almost never. So you can get much more higher chance, doubling your chances essentially, of getting a Cindercoat from a monk. So make sure you do level up that monk if you're seriously trying to gamble for that Cindercoat. Now, next up in the pants slot is another item I don't have. It's the Hexxing Pants of Mr. Yan. This is a fairly new addition to the game. It was technically in the game, but it couldn't actually drop before it was bugged. But now that it's been added in, it turns out it's really crazy good for this style of spec. Now, I originally looked at this, and it has a secondary proc. It has your resource generation and damage is increased by 25%. I think it's up to 25% while moving, and decreased by 22% while standing still. It's up to 25% again. So basically, you have more damage while moving, and resource generation is increased while moving. So this is very good for the reasons we've already covered on other items. But while moving, this part threw me off initially. I thought this is only going to work with Strafe specs and Whirlwind specs and, anything that's constantly moving. However, it has a 1 second sticky time. So basically, if I take a step and stop moving, for 1 second, I will have that effect. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm playing a spec like this, I'm usually doing something like this. Stutter stepping constantly repositioning, moving around. That means most of the time you're going to have that effect. You're going to have that increased resource regeneration, and you're going to have that increased damage as well. So you take a step, you fire a cluster arrow, take a step, fire a cluster arrow. Each one of those is going to have up to 25% increased damage. A huge buff from pants slots. Pants slots aren't supposed to be offensive, but this is a huge offensive boost, as well as while you're running around, you're getting extra hatred, and that should also mean while you're vaulting around, you're getting extra hatred as well. So this is another one I'm really keen to get. and it's another random world drop, so you just need to get lucky or gamble on those pants slots. You're fine to gamble on a Demon Hunter for this one. There's no specific Demon Hunter only legendaries that would take the spot of Hexxing Pants of Mr. Yan, but another very solid one. And the secondary, legendary effect is a secondary stat too, so you can still get your full 4 primary stats there. You can get, you can get your dexterity, vitality, or resist, and then 2 gem slots. Sorry. So still a very powerful item. You don't really have to sacrifice anything for this amazing secondary stat. So very, very powerful legendary again. Now we move on to the final slot, something you guys are probably pretty hyped for, the weapons. The weapons. Now, I think overall that for this style of play, one-handers are better, pretty much hands down. There are some pretty good two-handers out there. Bruiser and Crider Shot are quite good, but they're not for this sort of meta, and they aren't really the dominating builds at the time. And I think in general, for most people, 2 one-handers is going to be more powerful than a two-hander and a quiver any day because of that increased crit damage and because of the powerful mods that we can get on these legendary two-handers. So, there's actually 2 best in slots for this because they kind of work for different things. So, the first one is the Danetta's set. Now, I have the Danetta's 2 set. This includes Danetta's Spite and Danetta's Revenge. Now, these are decent crossbows in general. You can get your Hatred regen on them. You can get your maximum discipline on both of them. You'll see I got 11 on this one and 12. And each one of these is quite good by themselves. But they aren't best in slot good by themselves. Danetta's Spite leaves a clone behind you after you vault. So you'll see that clone there. It'll fire at enemies. Apparently it deals damage. I've never really noticed how much damage it does, but it will distract enemies from attacking you. So a very nice defensive increase there. And Danetta's Revenge gives you the effect of the Rattling Roll rune. So you can essentially have 2 runes on your vault. And what Rattling Roll does is that whenever you vault through an enemy, they'd get knocked away and stunned for 1.5 seconds. So it's a guaranteed stun. Very nice defensive increases on both of these and makes Vault a very nice utility, just one or the other. But combined together, Vault costs Hatred instead of Discipline. Now, when I first read this, I thought, this seems kind of situational. Not all builds going to want this. It's going to be like, this is going to cost Hatred and going to take away from your cluster arrow spam and things like that. But after actually using it, especially in a build with a lot of resource cost reduction, you realize pretty quickly how little this amount of Hatred is. 8 Hatred, which gets reduced down to like 4 or 5, depending on how much resource cost reduction you have, is very, very little. And it allows you to do things like this. Pretty much infinite vaulting. Like, I can vault around all day. By the time I finally use enough of my Hatred to really notice any sort of dent, I can just pop Preparation Punishment. And before that Hatred gets used again, you'll notice my Discipline is full again. So, infinite vaulting. Some of you guys might have seen my campaign speedrun I did with the Danetta's set. It's insanely good. Now, just vaulting alone, this, isn't, why is that good best in slot? Because mobility is everything in this sort of game. Being able to get around to bounties in like a third of the time you would otherwise using Vault on Discipline, and being able to clear rifts like crazy. When you get a Conduit Shrine, you can clear an entire zone with Vault. And more than that, even more powerful, is it allows you to be immune to damage a lot of the time. When you're vaulting, you're actually immune to damage, and you'll see the downtime between vaults here. I can basically fire some cluster arrows, vault if danger's there, reposition, and it costs me almost nothing to do so, so I can spam like crazy and just keep vaulting for repositioning. A bunch of, cold explosions about to go off, 10 arcane lasers on the ground, simply vault out of the way, easy mode, you knock and stun back enemies, and deal a lot of damage along the way as well. Now I use Action Shot, the Action Shot rune with the Danetta's set, because this is 4 guaranteed crits, and I use it with the Night Stalker passive, so this actually restores Discipline as well. So it's even more infinite because I can use this, and when I vault around, I'm generating up to 4 Discipline each vault, as well as dealing a fair amount of damage with the actual skill. It's also OP in PvP. Having a Danetta's set in PvP means nothing can hurt you, because you're constantly vaulting, and you just kill things with the actual Action Shot rune. So crazy good set, and I think the reason I call this best in slot is because it's best in slot from Torments 1 to 4, where mobility is really everything for clear speed. Now, the reason I said there's 2 different weapons that I would consider best in slot, the Danetta's set is one of those best in slot items. The second one is becomes best in slots in Torment 5 and 6. I don't think Danettas have the damage needed. Although they give you a lot of mobility, they don't have the damage needed to really break into Torment 5 and 6. Now, I think with all perfect items, if I get my Cindercoat and my Hexxing Pants of Mr. Yan, I think I'm going to be able to do Torment 5 and maybe even Torment 6 with some level of efficiency with the Danetta set. It'll certainly be a lot of fun, because playing with Danettas is incredibly fun. But I think to get really, really high damage, in those higher torments, in torments 5 and 6, I really need a Calamity. Now Calamity is probably the best in slot, single best hander. It gives you the effect of when you hit enemies, they become marked with the marked for death. Now if you have marked for death equipped on your toolbar, which you don't necessarily need to do, it'll actually take the rune, but otherwise this is just a flat 20% increase in damage. So Calamity can roll very high. I've seen Calamities with upwards of 2,700 DPS on them, and then you can you still get your sock and everything as well. And then when you actually hit things, they get a 20% increased damage. You don't need to have this skill equipped to your character even. So I think to really get enough damage to do Torment 5 and 6 super efficiently, I think a Calamity is needed, and this can be paired with any offhander, can be paired with something like a Hell Trapper, it can even be paired with a Natalya's set hand crossbow, so you can have the Natalya's set bonus, and or you can just be compared with one of the Danettas even, it can even be paired with one of the Danettas, but Calamity is probably the best single-hander for higher torments. However, I think if you're in those lower torments, you're gonna do better overall with the Danettas because of that clear speed. Now, the Danetta's set is a random world drop. I'm not even 100% sure if you can gamble for these, so if you guys have ever gambled one of these, I'll let you know. Not all sets will gamble from Kadala, and it's a bit unsure. I'm a bit unsure of which one specifically, but mostly they're just random world drops. I got one from a chest in Torment 6, doing chest farming at some point, and I got one from Rifts, doing Rifts in Torment 1, so these are just ones that you're just going to have to accrue over time. There's nothing you can really specifically do for them. And as I said, I'm not sure if gambling works. Calamity is the same. It's a random world drop. However, because it's just a legendary one-hander, you should be able to gamble it from Kadala just fine. That said, I don't recommend gambling on one-handers as a Demon Hunter. You'll find yourself getting a lot of swords and axes, and they're also pretty expensive on the blood shards. But if you're desperate for your Calamity, then that might be something to do after you've filled out all of your other gear slots. So anyway, guys, hopefully you found this interesting and helpful. If you have any, questions about any of these items, or you have maybe some items you consider to be best in slot, you'll notice I didn't mention things like shoulders or anything else like that because I don't really consider there to be any best in slot items for those. There's just items that are good. And if you have any, recommendations, make sure to leave them in the comments below. I will give an honorable mention here at the end of the video to the Captain Crimson set. If you're sort of working your way into these best in slot items, then Captain Crimson's is very good. I also have a guide which I'll link in the description below for how to craft these. The 3 set bonus, this is the belt, pants, and boots, gives you 10% resource cost reduction, in addition to 50 ore res and some cooldown reduction and regen. So pretty nice set before you get like your Hexxing pants of Misty Yan and things like that. But anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.